Well, hello, and welcome back to the exact same setting we were in the last video, because it's still me. I'm still here filming after an extremely long time. But the video was getting too long in the last one, so I cut it, and now we're coming back, and we're jumping right back in to book 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Fever Dream. Fever Dream is the first book in the Helen trilogy within this series of books. Now, who's Helen, you might ask? Well, Helen is Special Agent Pendergast's former wife. I think my dog wants to go upstairs, so I'm just going to let her out. Anyone else out there has pets that demand attention at the most inopportune times? All right, so we're going to jump in here with Fever Dream. So Helen Pendergast, who is she? Well, this is where we find out. So let me insert picture, Fever Dream, and I will read you the description. At the old family manse in Louisiana, Special Agent Pendergast is putting to rest long-ignored possessions reminiscent of his wife Helen's tragic death, only to make a stunning and dreadful discovery. Helen had been mauled by an unusually large and vicious lion while they were big game hunting in Africa. But now Pendergast learns that her rifle, her only protection from the beast, had been deliberately loaded with blanks. Who could have wanted Helen dead, and why? With Lieutenant Vincent Augusta's assistance, Pendergast embarks on a quest to uncover the mystery of his wife's murder. It is a journey that sends him deep into her past, where he learns much that Helen herself had wished to keep hidden. Helen Pendergast had nursed a secret obsession with a famed naturalist painter, John James Audubon, and particularly a long-lost painting of his known as the Black Frame. As Pendergast probes more deeply into the riddle, the answer to which is revealed in a night of shocking violence deep in the Louisiana bayou, he finds himself face to face with an even greater question. Who was the woman he married? So, that can probably tell you things again are about to get strange. Much like the Diogenes trilogy, the Helen trilogy just keeps getting weirder. So, for this book, I wrote down, I just kind of did them all as one. So I'm actually just going to redo the next two, and then we'll come back and talk about them. So we'll insert picture of the next book, which is Cold Vengeance, book 2 of the Helen trilogy. Nothing is what it seems. Devastated by the discovery that his wife Helen was murdered, Special Agent Pendergast must have retribution. But revenge is not simple. As he stalks his wife's betrayers, a chase that takes him from the wild moors of Scotland to the bustling streets of New York City and the darkest bayous of Louisiana, he is also forced to dig further into Helen's past, and he is stunned to learn that Helen may have been a collaborator in her own murder. Peeling back the layers of deception, Pendergast realizes that the conspiracy is deeper, goes back generations, and is more monstrous than he could have ever imagined. And everything he's believed, everything he's trusted, everything he's understood may be a horrific lie. See? It's getting deeper, it's getting weirder, it's getting more elaborate. So that was that one. Now, the final in the Helen trilogy was a book called Two Graves, and I'll insert the photo here. And we'll just move right into the description of that one, which was: after his wife Helen is brazenly abducted before his eyes, Special Agent Pendergast furiously pursues the kidnappers, chasing them across the country and into Mexico. But then things go terribly, tragically wrong. The kidnappers escape, and a shattered Pendergast retreats to his New York apartment and shuts out the world. But when a string of bizarre murders erupts across several Manhattan hotels, perpetrated by a boy who seems to have an almost psychic ability to elude capture, NYPD Lieutenant D'Agosta asks his friend Pendergast for help. Reluctant at first, Pendergast soon discovers that the killings are a message from his wife's kidnappers. But why a message? What does it mean? When the kidnappers strike again at those closest to Pendergast, the FBI agent, filled anew with a vengeful fury, sets out to track down and destroy those responsible. His journey takes him deep into the trackless forests of South America, where he ultimately finds himself face to face with an old evil that, rather than having been eradicated, is stirring anew, and with potentially world-altering consequences. Confucius once said, "Before you embark on a journey of revenge, first dig 2 graves." Pendergast is about to learn the hard way just how true those words still ring. So, obviously there was a bit of a spoiler there, and even though I'm not going into the details, as you progress through the books, details from the previous books get revealed, especially in this section where you kind of go, oh wait, she was dead. Oh wait, she's alive? ? But is she really? So I'll leave you with that question. And I will say these were my notes. These books were a wild ride. Love and lost love, betrayal and deception. There is Nazis. Things just get so complicated and really fills in the other half of Pendergast's history and his immediate family, and helps to explain why he is the way he is. So you kind of get like one half of Pendergast's story in the Diogenes trilogy, and then you get another half filled in with the Helen trilogy, and you're kind of like, okay, things make a little more sense now as to why he's peculiar in the way that he is. So again, wild story, super complex in the end. Again, you're just kind of left in this constant state of what and banging your head against a wall for like what people do. But it's still fun, and it's just a ride. You gotta keep going to the end. So then we end up in the book White Fire. Corey Swanson sets out to solve a long-forgotten mystery. In 1876, in a remote mining camp called Roaring Fork in the Colorado Rockies, several miners were killed in devastating grizzly bear attacks. Now the town has become an exclusive ski resort, and its historic cemetery has been dug up to make way for development. Corey has arranged to examine the remains of the dead miners, but in doing so, she makes a shocking discovery that threatens the resort's very existence. The town leaders try to stop her from exposing their community's dark and bloody past, arrest and jail her. Special Agent Pendergast of the FBI arrives to help, just as a series of brutal arson attacks on a multi-million-dollar homes terrify the town and drive away tourists. Drawn irresistibly into the investigation, Pendergast discovers an unlikely secret in Roaring Fork's past, connecting the resort to a chance meeting between Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Oscar Wilde. With the town under siege and Corey's life in desperate danger, Pendergast must solve the riddle of the past before the town of the present goes up in flames. So what I wrote down for this one was independent, unique setting, miners, murder, cannibalism, madness, literary connection to Oscar Wilde and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. It's good. Can't really say too much. After all the craziness of the Helen trilogy, it was a nice break. So, yeah, it was good. It was a little strange. There was like a connection to hat making, which, if you're into haberdashery, or not technically hat making, but felt making, which is used to make hats. Interesting side information that popped up in that book that I didn't know. So let's move on. Now, the next three books, Blue Labyrinth, Crimson Shore, and The Obsidian Chamber, are not technically considered to be a trilogy. Okay. So these three books, not technically connected in the sense that they have not officially been designated a trilogy. However, one leads into the other. So if you read them out of order, or if you read Crimson Shore or The Obsidian Chamber without having read Blue Labyrinth or Crimson Shore, then you'll be missing stuff. Like, the context really requires you to read these ones in order. And again, not for the main storylines. This is where all of the stuff that's going on in the background with the characters and how they relate to each other is how these books are connected. I gotta pause for a second. I'm back. I had to take a little break there. My dog was getting a little rowdy, and I got myself some just regular water. And a shawl to keep myself a little warmer. So we're at 11, 12, and 13. Blue Labyrinth. A long-buried family secret resurfaces when one of Aloysius Pendergast's most implacable enemies shows up on his doorstep as a murdered corpse. The mystery has all the hallmarks of the perfect murder, save for an enigmatic clue. A piece of turquoise lodged in the stomach of the deceased. The gem leads Pendergast to an abandoned mine on the shore of California's desolate Salton Sea, which in turn propels him on a journey of discovery deep into his family's sinister past. But Pendergast learns there's more at work than a ghastly episode of family history. He is soon stalked by a subtle killer bent on vengeance over an ancient transgression. In short order, Pendergast is caught in a wickedly clever plot which will leave him stricken in mind and body and may well end with his death. So, this book specifically, if you haven't read the Helen trilogy, a lot of context will be missing. Just throwing that out there. So now we'll jump to Crimson Shore. Special Agent Pendergast takes on a private case in Exmouth, Massachusetts, a quaint village on the coast north of Salem, to investigate the theft of a valuable wine collection. He travels to the seaside town with his ward, Constance Green, where they quickly discover something far more sinister, a bricked-up niche in a wine cellar that holds the remains of a man tortured and then entombed alive 150 years ago. But why? The puzzle is compounded when they discover a freshly murdered body covered with mysterious symbols in the salt marshes behind Exmouth, the place where, legend has it, the real witches of Salem took refuge after fleeing the 1692 witch hunts. Sorry if that kind of cut off a little abruptly there. The next part of the description on their website was just a quote review of the book. So then we move into the Obsidian Chamber. Now, on face value, again, that book sounds like it's an independent story. However, a lot of stuff is happening in the background with the characters that relates to their history and stuff that happened in the book before and many of the books before that. So would not recommend reading this as an independent story. This book needs context. And if you don't have it, you're gonna be lost. So this is how this book is described. Insert photo and listen for description. Okay. A tragic disappearance. After a harrowing, otherworldly confrontation on the shores of Exmouth, Massachusetts, Special Agent A.X.L. Pendergast is missing, presumed dead. A shocking return. Sick with grief, Pendergast's ward, Constance, retreats to her chambers beneath the family mansion at 891 Riverside Drive, only to be taken captive by a shadowy figure from the past. An international manhunt. Proctor, Pendergast's longtime bodyguard, springs to action, chasing Constance's kidnapper through cities, across oceans, and into wastelands unknown. But in a world of black and white, nothing is as it seems. And by the time Proctor discovers the truth, a terrifying engine has stirred, and it may already be too late. Well, I don't think that really tells you anything about the events that really unfold in that book, of which there is a lot, and it's weird and bizarre. And of all of the books, the Obsidian Chamber, and it's just kind of like these people are so warped and so scarred by their pasts that their behavior is just out of this world. It's weird. I don't know how I really felt about what unfolded in these books, because I was just kind of like shaking my head most of the time. I just wrote, they just get weirder and weirder, you've really got to be informed on the rest of the story. I think you really got to be informed on the rest of the story to make it through these. And that is the honest to goodness truth of these three books, is that if you haven't read the rest of the story, there is no point in reading them, because there are, well, the Obsidian Chamber, absolutely not. Just chuck that one. The other two do have stories in them, but again, there's so much other stuff going on that it becomes lost. And I would actually say Blue Labyrinth, chuck that one as well, because that one relates so much to the Helen trilogy that you really can't read these three books if you don't have the context of the rest of the story and everything else that's going on. So we're going to cross those off. say that I would not recommend those as an entry point in any way. If you've read everything else, then you might as well read them. I will say that is it Blue Labyrinth? You get another side of the Pendergast family generations. I don't want to give away like a key spoiler that comes out in the Helen trilogy, and then follows into these books. But one of my favorite characters really shines in this kind of storyline, and it's weird. And I will say it's Tristram. I laughed every single time I heard a narrator say the name Tristram. I was like, oh my god, his name is Tristram. And then I just couldn't stop saying it, and it was driving the people around me mad because I just was incorporating it into like my everyday life because I just thought it was hilarious, and I became obsessed. So in my 2024 review of a year-end wrap-up, I gave a shout-out to Diogenes, and I gave a shout-out to Tristram, and they're like opposite ends of the spectrum. And technically, there's an opposite end of the Tristram spectrum that's a different character, but they're just kind of like worlds apart, and in like how damage and kind of an inciting event and kind of like abuse and stuff manifests completely differently in people. But yeah, so if you don't read these, then you kind of don't get that context on my boy Tristram. But still, and it's weird because then, until I think Angel of Vengeance, the last book, I don't think you ever hear about Tristram again. They just kind of forget he exists. I'll mention that now because I'll probably forget to mention it once I start talking about the other books. But what happens to my boy Tristram? Like, if you've read these books, were you also wondering, where's Tristram? Let me know. Hashtag where's Tristram? We can start that, and maybe they'll let us know in the next book, whenever that one comes out. But yeah, so that's kind of the bright point in that mess of those three books that were just kind of like this whirlpool of madness and bad decisions. But yeah, so then after that we get into The City of Endless Night, and that is another standalone book, completely on its own. You can read it without context. So I'll throw the book in here, and I will give you the synopsis, which is: vengeance. Vengeance is what's happened. It begins as a manhunt for Grace Osmain, the missing daughter of a wealthy tech billionaire. At first, the NYPD assumes Grace, beautiful, reckless, and a regular feature of the local tabloids, has simply sped off on another wild adventure. But the case becomes something altogether different when the young woman's body is discovered in an abandoned warehouse in Queens, the head nowhere to be found. Lieutenant CDS Vincent D'Agosta quickly takes the lead. He knows his investigation will attract fierce scrutiny, so D'Agosta is delighted when FBI Special Agent AXL Pendergast shows up at the crime scene, also assigned to the case. I feel rather like a bare rabbit being thrown into the briar patch, Pendergast tells Augusta, because I have found you here in charge, just like when we first met back at the Museum of Natural History. Augusta hopes the case will give Pendergast an opportunity to demonstrate his considerable abilities back in the city he has made home. But neither Pendergast nor Augusta are prepared for what lies ahead. It quickly becomes clear that a diabolical presence is haunting the greater metropolitan area. And Grace Osmane was only the first of many victims to be murdered and decapitated. Still worse, there's something unique to the city itself that has attracted the evil eye of the killer, or killers. As mass hysteria sets in, Pendergast and Augusta find themselves in the crosshairs of an opponent who has threatened the very lifeblood of the city. It'll take all of Pendergast's skills to unmask this most dangerous foe, let alone survive to tell the tale. Okay, so that's that book. Again, independent story. I wrote in my notes here another independent story, also solid, I think, but at this point I'm kind of something. I can't read my notes. That's not good. I think I was just kind of tired. It's just kind of your basic police procedural, but a lot more complex. In the end, I think this book, especially, I found kind of after reading all of this other stuff, was just kind of this example of how Pendergast is this character that is seemingly so smart, but yet also so dumb. And it's just kind of like you can't be everything all the time, and I don't know. I didn't really like that one. I think, especially coming off the kind of rat's nest of the last three, to then read this independent one. It wasn't like the palate cleanser that Whitefire was for the Helen trilogy. It was just kind of like, okay, this is happening, blah blah blah. If you read this book first, I'm trying to think of how I would have interpreted it if I had just read it on its own, because it is one of the books that I got in my book haul at the beginning of the year, and then I didn't read it because then I started reading them all in order. Because at first I got, in my previous book haul, I got Verses for the Dead, Crooked River, and Bloodless, which were all in order, and I read those all in order. And then I had also got City of Endless Night, which was the one that preceded those. But by that time, I was like, oh, I'm going to start at the beginning. And so, yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of ambiguous about that one. I don't love it. I don't hate it. I don't think the villain was a good one. I think that was my problem with it. That as I'm thinking about it right now, I just think that the villain wasn't a good one. I didn't like him, and it wasn't, after kind of like how elaborate things were in the past, and this was elaborate, but also kind of just like uninspired. So we'll cross that one off the list. I'm going to keep hitting that. I should probably move it. That butter's so cold. It's so good. All right, so then we move into Verses for the Dead, which we've already reviewed. So I don't think I'm going to cover those just because everything is so long already that if you want to know more about those, then you can go and watch those individual reviews. So Verses for the Dead, Crooked River, and Bloodless, and The Cabinet of Dr. Lang. Bloodless and The Cabinet of Dr. Lang were done together. They feed into each other. Crooked River precedes Bloodless and sets the stage for Bloodless, but it doesn't have anything to do with it. Crooked River was a good book. I will say that. I'll insert a picture of it here. It was unsettling. I remember doing the review for that one and just kept thinking unsettling. And it was because of like the kind of real world thing that emerges at the end. And I won't give it away. I didn't give it away in that review either. But oh man, it just left me with this eerie feeling of I don't want this to be real. So that was Crooked River. Highly recommend. It introduces us to the character of Cold Moon, who is in a couple of the books after that. I'm ready for him to come back. I'm ready to get us some more Cold Moon in future books. If we get more books, I hope that they bring him back, because the kind of play of him and Pendergast, he's an interesting character thrown into the mix of just a lot of like heavy, dense characters. He is also complex, but in a more simple way, you know, like he's got his backstory, he's got his like history, but he's also fun. He brings that kind of lighthearted element that like D'Agosta does. And okay, I'll talk about that when I get into Angel of Vengeance. But yeah, let's just do that. So we've done Crooked River, Bloodless, the Savannah Vampire D.B. Cooper story was also all right. You can check out that review. The Cabinet of Dr. Lang. Okay, so this is where things get complicated. So Bloodless, you'll notice you can't see, but again, I'll put it on the screen if I can. Bloodless has a tangential attachment to the Cabinet of Dr. Lang. I think I almost set my paper on fire there. You know, I've been sitting here a while. Things are getting a little dicey. It like I have it half blue and half light blue to go into this. So the newest book, Angel of Vengeance, which is the one I have here to feature, the feature book of this video. How's that? That's great. This is the newest book, and it is the last book in what I'm calling a quadrilogy, because it starts in the third book of the series, The Cabinet of Curiosities. And then we go Bloodless, and then we go The Cabinet of Dr. Lang, and then we go Angel of Vengeance. So those 4 books go together. Now, within the series, there are a lot of kind of lines that lead from the Cabinet of Curiosities down through the characters. So we're introduced to Constance in the Cabinet of Curiosities, and then we learn more about her through the books, and then she has her own side stories with different characters, and everything kind of leads together at the end into Angel of Vengeance, which is this beautiful book. Something I will say, I don't have the other books, they're upstairs. that frustrated me immensely when I went to get this book from the bookstore was all of the other books that preceded this were done in a soft, matte book jacket. And I don't know if you can tell, you can probably tell, this is as shiny and high gloss as you can get in a book jacket. She's shiny. So aesthetically, because I know in my reviews, I like to talk about the aesthetics of the book jacket because I think it's, they say don't judge a book by its cover, but, you know, it's what gets your attention most of the time. It's what was so disappointing about the book. This is Not a Ghost Story. I just filmed that year-end wrap-up, and I remember talking about that. But anyways, this book jacket is nice. But on my bookshelf, it's frustrating because it's shiny and all the other ones are matte. And some of the other ones in the series are shiny, but the ones that specifically precede this one and belong to its storyline are matte. And this one's shiny. And maybe they did that to make it stand out because it's like the culmination of those books. So it's kind of like the end, it's significant, it's shiny. I don't know if that was an active choice or it's just how it happened to be, or maybe there are versions of the book where it was a matte cover, maybe, I don't know, but that's kind of an aside. So let me read to you Angel of Vengeance. Now, warning, I can't remember exactly what this says, but I'm going to go ahead and assume spoilers. Okay. A desperate bargain is broken. Constance Green confronts Manhattan's most dangerous serial killer, Enoch Lang, bartering for her sister's life, but she's betrayed and turned away empty-handed, incandescent with rage. A clever trap is set. Unknown to Lang, Pendergast's brother Diogenes appears unexpectedly, offering to help, for mysterious reasons of his own. Disguised as a cleric, Diogenes establishes himself in New York's notorious 5 Point slum, manipulating events like a chess master, watching Lang's every move and awaiting his own chance to strike back. A vengeful angel will not be deterred. Meanwhile, Pendergast joins forces with the unstable Constance in her seemingly doomed quest to rescue her siblings from a tragic fate and take savage retribution on Lang. But Lang is one step ahead and has a surprise for them all. So, if you watched my review of The Cabinet of Dr. Lang, you will know that I mentioned at the end of that book there was like this surprise reveal of Diogenes at the end, and I'm like, who is Diogenes? Because up to that point I had no idea, because I had only read these books that were at the end of the series and he wasn't in them, and so to go back and read this character's journey up into the point of this book was worth reading all of the books, I will say. I know that this book has gotten mixed reviews in the fandom, but I liked it. I thought it was a really good wrap-up of the storylines that it had to tackle. Because there were a lot of points that had to come together in this book. A lot of ends to tie up, a lot of ground to cover, and the way that it's structured, some people had issues with kind of how separate the storylines are. The characters don't interact that much with each other in the book. Their stories are told simultaneously. But I liked it. So I will say you absolutely cannot read this book without the context of at least the other 3 books that go with it, or at least definitely the one that precedes it. And I would highly recommend The Cabinet of Curiosities as well. And also Bloodless, because Bloodless sets the stage for how this book can even happen. So there's a lot of details, and as you can tell by the fact that this was so long and there's so many books, there's so much context in a character story like this. And I think the value of this book for me, not this book, but this series, was in the characters. So you have D'Agosta, you have Hayward, minor characters, but then you have kind of, I guess they're not minor characters. It's hard to differentiate kind of minor but significant characters. So reoccurring characters of D'Agosta, Hayward, Corey, Smithback, Cold Moon are kind of like the second tier characters. And then you have like the upper tier characters of the main 3 of being Pendergast, Diogenes, and Constance. So those are kind of like your 3 threads and how they kind of wind together and braid together and tangle and untangle and unravel and fray. They are the threads that bind this series together. And so if you find any of them interesting, then it pulls you into the story and pulls you through reading all of the books. So yeah, it was a wild ride, this series. I don't know how much I'm looking forward to future books right now. I need a break from this character and this world. So I'm excited for the books that I have coming in the new year to read. But this is definitely like an established story, and these authors have fans, and there's so many books for a reason. The character is a lot of fun, interesting, dynamic. The main character of Aloysius Pendergast and the other 2 characters of Constance Green and Diogenes Pendergast. And then you also have the running character of Enoch Lang, who is in the beginning and the end of the series. It's just very complex. It's kind of hard to wrap my head around just exactly how much information I've consumed in the last year about these characters. It's almost unfathomable to think. And if it hadn't been for the audiobooks, I probably would still be working my way through them, just because I wouldn't have had the time to sit down and physically devote that much time to these. So if you are someone who struggles with time or likes to engage in stories but can't focus on text or has issues reading text, definitely check out audiobooks. I was kind of skeptical of them. For books I hadn't read. Harry Potter, I knew backwards, forwards, inside out before I ever listened to those audiobooks. And I was afraid that in listening to an audiobook, I wouldn't be able to follow the story because I wouldn't really be paying attention. That was how I thought about it. But, like music, if you listen to music and you hear it and you learn it in the background, and sometimes you have to re-listen to chapters or you're listening and then you're like, oh wait, I don't think I've heard the last 10 minutes because I was focusing on some other task. you just rewind it. And that happens when you're reading too. Sometimes you're reading on autopilot and then you're like, wait, I don't remember the last 3 paragraphs that I just read. Let me go back and read those. So there's obviously benefits and drawbacks to audiobooks, but if you're looking to get through like a mass of material, and if you try one and it works out, then, try another, because I'm interested to know. Some people love audiobooks. Some people hate them. Some people can't listen to books. It's too hard to identify which characters. Something that was really great, and I don't know if this is the common thing with audiobooks, but the narrators in both cases, for Scott and Renee, they did do different voices for the characters, and that is really helpful in just kind of passively keeping track of who is speaking, because obviously they're doing different accents. I did find, because I listened to a lot more books that were Renee, I do find that he reused some voices for different characters in different books, which obviously you only have so many voices in your repertoire, so some of them are going to sound similar when you're doing different characters, but across different books. But that was something that I would say, I think a lot of people love Renee because they identify his voice, the way that he does Pendergast, as like the voice in their head of him. But I think because I had read books before doing the audiobooks, I had already established the characters in my head, so it wasn't colored by that. And so I actually preferred Scott's narration in the audiobooks. I think that his characters were more distinguishable from each other in the voices that he chose to do. I'm a ways out from this whole consumption of information, so I'm not sure how accurate my recollection of that entirely is, but thinking back about it, that was how I felt about it at the time. I was kind of disappointed when all of the later ones were just Renee, but I think Scott just redid ones after the abridged versions were originally published. I'm not really sure how that worked out, but yeah, so that's been this. That's been a large freaking chunk of my life this year, was reading, consuming all of the content of this series. It was a wild ride. That is the theme. Really, there's some really good bad guys in this series. Lang was great. Diogenes was great. Even in instances where the bad guy wasn't necessarily intentional or like purposeful, they were really good, like really inventive, some of the things. So I definitely think that it's worth checking out some of these. If you're interested, checking out them all. Start with Relic and Reliquary. Those were really fun. Or if you just want a one-off, try Crooked River or Still Life with Crows. Those would be my recommendations, I think. I found Cabinet of Curiosities to be a little bit fast-paced or sparse, or like it was missing something. So I'm not sure I'd recommend that as a starting point, unless you're going to go with like reading them all. So yeah, that's it. If you've read any of these books, if this is something you're familiar with, if it's not, are you interested? Are you intrigued? Yeah. All right. Thanks for joining me here tonight, guys, at my desk. The next one will hopefully be a lot more simple and straightforward. Yeah. All right.